Welcome to the Western Ohio Pbis Network podcast. My name is Brandy Stiegel. You are watching video 2 of the 7-part video series that is going to focus on helping your Tier 1 Pbis team develop the Tier 1 framework that includes those systems and supports that will support your universal school-wide implementation. After this video, you will understand the vital role of administrative leadership in your discipline efforts. You will understand how to establish a viable school-wide Pbis leadership team that is going to be representative of the staff and who also has the skills and have established those group processes necessary to ensure your team's productivity. You will understand how to use effective action planning to guide and monitor development tasks. You will understand how to develop strategies to ensure full staff engagements and consistency building as you are developing that school-wide action plan. And you will understand how to assess important conditions for lasting change relative to your school and make plans to address key issues to ensure the success of your implementation. So in the last video, we discussed the foundations of Pbis. We discussed how to create that shared and common philosophy that is going to be necessary to ensure sustainability of your implementation. In this video, we will focus on establishing that leadership team that is going to drive that planning process and ensure that that Pbis framework is being implemented with fidelity. So once a school building or district decides to implement Pbis, the first task is going to be that administrator or that leadership team, that district-wide leadership team is going to have to develop a building leadership team. So the Tier 1 leadership team is going to be essential in planning that effective Pbis framework and putting in those systems and supports that's going to be necessary to support student success. So some of the responsibilities of that school-wide Tier 1 Pbis team include: 1, initially gathering input from staff, families, and students, as well as other data sources to evaluate the effectiveness of the current policies and practices. So of course, before we embark on any initiative, regardless of if it's Pbis, if it's any type of new school improvement initiative, the first thing we always want to do is evaluate where we are as a staff, and so that as an organization. And so that Pbis team is going to be responsible for starting that work and using that as the beginning point to build their implementation. Another responsibility is that team is going to be responsible for using that information to gain staff commitment to the needed changes and developing a common philosophy of discipline. As we said, in order for any initiative to be successful, you need a majority or 80% of your staff to buy in. So that team is going to be responsible for putting in practices that are going to help establish that staff buy-in and that stakeholder buy-in. Another responsibility is going to be assisting staff to understand best practices for developing responsible student behavior and the elements of an effective school-wide discipline policy. So again, the leadership team is going to serve as the persons that are going to be responsible for ensuring that the educators and the student personnel have those skills necessary to promote the instruction and the mastery of those social skills. The Tier 1 team is going to be responsible for guiding staff through a procedure development process to improve less effective practices and to protect effective practices by clarifying them and putting them in writing. So that team is going to spend some time doing some audits of those practices that we have in place and looking to see what is working and what's not working and what we need to change. So we're going to be looking at our current practices and what we're already doing, and we're going to take an audit of those practices. So once those practices are developed and protected in writing, this team is responsible for overseeing the implementation and maintenance and revisions of procedures. So essentially, this Tier 1 team is going to be responsible for creating that implementation and examining the status of the school and working with those additional stakeholders to figure out where they are as an organization and use that to drive their planning process. So as we said in the previous video, is that successful school improvements efforts are going to require strong leadership. So any initiative that you put in place is going to fail or succeed based on administrative commitment. So we need those administrators to be committed to this process and committed to providing the resource and the resources, the time, the commitment necessary to make PBIS implementation be successful. So some of the administrators' roles are, one, to maintain standards for best practices. And what that means is that the administrators are what we would call the clearinghouse for practice selection. They are the final determiner of how that school will address school improvement needs. So we need administrators to lead their staff toward research-based practices, and remove any practices and programs that may not be efficient or effective towards meeting the school improvement goals that they've established. The principal is going to be acting as a gatekeeper. So by acting as the gatekeeper, the principal can maintain those high standards for quality services. Another responsibility of the administrator is to publicly provide support for that initiative that they are implementing. And in this case, it is PBIS. So the words and action of that administrative are powerful. They have the ability to make an initiative be successful, or they have the ability to cause it to fail. So once a commitment has been made to embark on this process of creating a PBIS framework or implementation in your school, it's important that the principal inform the staff that whatever is possible and reasonable, they are going to do to work with them to accomplish the goals of that initiative. They need to understand that they have administrative support and that principal is going to do whatever is possible within their realm to support those people that have to implement whatever that initiative is. And like I said, in this case, it's PBIS. So that's going to provide credibility, and it's going to make it easier to get that staff buy-in and tackle all of those related activities that are going to be needed to get this implementation off the ground. That publicly supporting any initiative, and in this case PBIS, is going to also mean that the school's efforts are going to be made visible to all stakeholders. So not only the faculty and staff, but to the other district personnel, the students, the families, and the community. So another role is that principal or that administrator is going to be the person that is going to establish that school-wide PBIS leadership team. So the principal gives the staff, is going to assign staff a leadership role by establishing that leadership team. And we'll talk a little bit later in the video about ways that they can use things that they can do, strategies they can use to select that leadership team. So as I said earlier, any successful school improvement must have staff buy-in. So this is more likely to occur if they play an active role in the process from the beginning, and if they understand that their voices are being heard, if their leadership team is representative of the staff. So that team should be representative of those who will be directly impacted by the change or that school improvement initiative. So therefore, a PBIS team should include teachers, paraprofessionals, supervisors, and parents and students, depending on what your environment looks like. And we'll talk about team composition here shortly. So having that leadership team allows for the that vital staff to give their perspective while still operating efficiently. It's essential that the principal be a member of that school-wide leadership team. They're not just going to assign the team and then walk away from it. They are an active participant. They are attending those meetings. They are giving the feedback. They are the ones that have the ability to make decisions. So they need to be very active in all of the tiers of PBIS. So the next responsibility of the administrator is to support that school-wide PBIS team members. So as we know, the PBIS leadership team is going to be assuming a big responsibility, and this is going to take a lot of time, a lot of commitment to provide the leadership necessary to establish that school-wide Pbis program. So the administrator is going to have to be very intentional to show that those people are appreciated, that they have the support from that administrator. So that administrator can show appreciation for their commitment by doing things to show that they appreciate them. So in addition, the principal needs to be sensitive to those members' workloads again, and make sure they're limiting their participation in other committees and school activities, and consider ways that they're going to compensate them for their time, whether it be something such as having a extra planning period to plan, giving them incentives to keep up with this work, because as we said, this is a large task that you're asking this leadership team to do on top of their already hefty schedule. It's important that that administrator protects the time that that leadership team has for meeting, because as we said, and as we'll discuss later on, that team needs to meet monthly, at a minimum of monthly. And as they're planning, they're going to need a lot more time to meet while they're trying to get that implementation off the ground. So it's very important that that administrator allocate the time and protect that time that's been allocated so that those people have the time to meet and make those decisions. Another responsibility is that the principal is going to guide the decision-making process. Again, they are going to be a participant, but they're also going to be a facilitator of that decision-making process. So we know that discipline policies have to be embraced and upheld by all in the school. A majority of the staff have to buy in. So there has to be a process for gaining staff consensus, and we'll talk about that later on. So an important leadership role of that administrator is going to teach and guide that Pbis leadership team through that process of making decisions and how they will make decisions and how they will decide. So we'll talk about the effective processes for determining consensus and decision making later on in this video. But there are some very important components that everyone must keep in mind. So every staff member needs to be heard. Everybody's voice should be heard. Those who have concerns should be invited to offer solutions. The best decisions are made, and when they take into account the people that they represent. And when they do that, decisions are more likely to be implemented consistently. So we need to have a process for shared decision making. So that administrator is going to play an active role in the decision making process in order to help avoid the possible tension that could come when they get stuck surrounding some type of decision on a policy or a system or something or whatever that team has to decide. So that administrator is going to help play the role as the mediator, but it's also going to help them guide them into understanding how they're going to make decisions. So with that said, that administrator is also going to take a leadership role in problem resolution. So even when teams establish those clear decision-making processes, in this portion, they may end up still having conflict among team members or between the staff. So even with the most perfect decision-making processes in place, there still will be conflict. And so that administrator will have a clear role in assisting that team with problem resolution and stepping in and leading the group to discover those workable solutions and how they can come to common ground. So that's going to be important. So this is often going to include making sure they're reminding the staff about their shared vision or their shared decision making or their common philosophy, and also encouraging that administrators are going to encourage effective communication, and they're going to be supporting those effective processes that are going to guide decisions. Of course, that another responsibility of that administrator is going to be supporting the team meetings. As we said, one of the most important things that an administrator can do to support the school-wide Pbis team is to consistently attend those team meetings and be present. So as a member of the team, their full participation must be a priority. and they must prioritize attending those school-wide PBIS Tier 1 meetings. So if an assistant principal has to serve on the team and regularly attends that school-wide PBIS leadership team meeting, the principal should also attend the meeting whenever possible. We know that sometimes administrators get busy, but this has to be made a priority and work around that. So ideally, meetings should be scheduled and put on the calendar so that no conflicts exist. So that leadership or the administrator is going to be responsible for providing recognition for faculty and teams and their work. So that administrator can support the team by recognizing privately as well as publicly the efforts of each team member, as well as any faculty who are working on behalf of the initiative and implementing with fidelity. So by showing this sincere appreciation through such things as toodles or notes or personal comments that are thanking them for their effort, that's often greatly appreciated. We know how well it feels. We talk about specific positive feedback. Well, adults need specific positive feedback as well. So by giving them this recognition, it's going to help continue the challenging work that is going to be needed to plan and implement a school-wide PBIS framework. So that administrator is also going to be responsible for serving as the point person for school-related groups. So their role in this is going to be to communicate the importance of the school-wide PBIS implementation, as well as reporting back on the progress of those goals and outcomes that that team and that leadership team has established. The principal or administrator is going to communicate with school groups or stakeholders rather, such as parents, district administrators, school boards, student organizations, as well as the community, to let them know how that implementation is impacting outcomes and moving them towards those outcomes that they are expecting. So an effective administration is always trying to refine their communication process and the processes that they use to communicate with their stakeholders. So another important role of that administrator is going to be to monitor the implementation activities and to provide feedback to the staff and the team. So the principals or the administrators have an important role where they're going to be supervising and monitoring the implementation of those agreed upon systems and practices that that team is going to be put in place. They're going to be looking to make sure that those things that were put into that PBIS action plan are being done with fidelity. So of course, just like students need feedback, staff needs feedback on how well they're implementing new strategies in order to refine and sustain the use of those strategies. So staff need to see tangible evidence of that administrator's interest and understand their expectations regarding that PBIS implementation. So that communication about the expectation needs to be consistent. That principal needs to provide that specific positive feedback or that specific praise and recognition to those staff that are implementing the PBIS framework with fidelity, as well as they need to give corrective feedback for those who are not implementing with fidelity and provide that support in order to help them begin implementing the PBIS with fidelity. So this can be done through private conversations, which is going to help those individuals understand the expectations and to identify any support or coaching that that person may need to be able to implement the PBIS implementation systems and supports with fidelity. So we always know that all staff members, all adults, all workers, employees, period, need to know that their cooperation is expected. They need to understand that the implementation of the PBIS framework and the practices will be monitored. And if there are problems, they may encounter while they're implementing that, they're going to get the support that they need to provide solutions and to find solutions to the problems that they're having. So another role of that administrator is going to be to review data and provide feedback regularly. So as I have mentioned in all of the videos that are on the channel, is that data collection is the most essential part to any school initiative, including PBIS. So the principal is going to need to assign an individual on the team who's going to be responsible for data monitoring. In addition, the secretarial or support staff may need to enter and create data charts for regular review by the principal and the leadership team. So someone has to be responsible for generating the data that that team's going to need in order to monitor their progress of that implementation. That data, once received, must be reviewed first with the team. As well, data should be shared with the entire staff. Uh, Using data to drive that implementation or provide that feedback is going to serve as a reinforcer um, and guide those teams to make adjustments when they need it. So it's going to reinforce when practices are working, but also help to guide when practices aren't working and help to understand when they need to pivot. So another responsibility is that the administrator is going to ensure that the innovation is sustained. So this means that that administrator is going to play an important and pivotal role in sustaining that school-wide PBIS implementation over time. So staff interest and commitment and attention may wane or decrease if other initiatives are introduced or if that staff feels that progress on addressing those problems is moving too slowly. So that administrator must be very strategic and intentional in putting in processes to keep all the staff focused on that school-wide PBIS and understanding, making sure they remember what the purpose and goals is, and to guide that work at an appropriate pace. So there must be a plan that is put in place to keep new staff, students, all staff knowledgeable of what the school is doing in terms of PBIS. Lastly, that administrator is going to have to make a time commitment. As we've said throughout, that any initiative, every initiative is going to succeed or fail based on the commitment of that administrator. So we know that changing a school culture requires that educators, one, take their time, um, spend time and have commitment, that they are trained to do the whatever we're asking them to do in the initiative, and that they understand how decisions are made with that within that initiative. So the principal must understand that it's going to take time to fully implement that school-wide PBIS plan. Research says that from start to full implementation and innovation and sustainability, that could be a 3 to 5 year process. So the principal is going to have to be patient and persistent to continue that school-wide PBIS implementation by continuing to provide that support, that participation, and that leadership that's necessary to move that implementation along. So school-wide discipline planning should not be viewed as either a top-down process or a bottom-up process. School-wide discipline should be viewed as a collaborative venture with administration and staff working together collectively to problem solve. Therefore, it's essential that the team include a building administrator and full representation of the building. So some people that could be, each team may look a little different depending on the level. So in an elementary school, a PBIS leadership team could be composed of the principal, a primary and intermediate teacher, a representative from each grade, a special education teacher, one of the specialists, whether it be a guidance counselor, a PE teacher, a music teacher, a library, someone that represents those educators, a paraprofessional, uh, at times a student and or a family member. So again, it is important that we have representation of our stakeholders within the building so everyone's voice can be represented. So in a middle school, a team composition might include the principal or assistant principal, one classroom teacher from each grade or team. As we know, we begin to be departmentalized as we go into higher grades, into middle school and high school. Of course, that special education teacher, paraprofessional, counselor, and a student or a family member. At that high school level, it's very similar to that middle school level. We should have represented, of course, as you see, all throughout that we need that principal or that assistant principal to be on that team. A teacher from each department. So we need a teacher in the English department, the science department, all of the different subject area and academic subject areas, or as well as the those specialists. We need a special education teacher, a paraprofessional, the counselor, and then a student as well as a family member. So the method for designating those school-wide Pbis team members should be given careful thought. So to be successful, the team should include staff members who are dedicated, those people who are doers, those people who are able to build relationships with their colleagues. They should be team players that are, who focus on solutions. They should have positive attitudes. They should be persuasive in their interactions with staff members, families, and students. So they really need to be people that have the ability to build relationships and sustain those relationships. The team members are going to be responsible for planning and leading the many school activities that are related to Pbis. And so they're going to have to be respected and be able to work well with those stakeholders. So this team is going to be responsible for most of those school improvement processes that are related to Pbis, which is going to be including presenting data, facilitating planning, and decision making about that, providing that training and coaching. They're going to be modeling and guiding those skills that we're asking teachers to do. They have to encourage those educators and the student personnel. So there are several ways that an administrator can select team members. Of course, they can just appoint people. Um, they can appoint people. They can use a volunteer process, or they can use an election process. But those persons that are chosen and selected by whatever means um, they need to be selected intentionally, because we need these people to be able to be dedicated as well as have the ability to build those relationships that are necessary to get that staff buy-in. So we come across this question a lot, is how do we compensate those team members, because they're going to be using a lot of their free time to do this planning and to get this implementation off the ground and sustain this implementation. So there's several things that an administrator can do to compensate them. So of course, if there is, the ideal method would be financial, some type of stipend, but that's not always possible. So what they could do is arrange meeting times and hire substitutes for a portion of the day when that team is going to need to meet, to free them up, and someone to supervise their class. Of course, as I just said, you can ask the team to meet outside of regular school hours and provide that extra pay or that stipend. You can arrange for additional preparation time by periodically having someone supervise that team member's class for them, or they can, as well, they can relieve those school-wide Pbis leadership team members of other duties such as bus duty, supervision, recess duty, cafeteria supervision, or any of those other things that we may have, or those other duties that they may have been assigned. But we want to free them up and ensure that they have the time to meet so that they can plan that Pbis school-wide implementation. So when we talk about the length of those team members' terms, So discipline planning and planning for school-wide PBIS is an ongoing process. So it's not just we put an implementation action plan in place and then we're done and we wipe our hand and that's all we have to do. This is an ongoing process. So the leadership team is going to be an ongoing committee. They're going to be consistently working. Their duties are going to be consistent and they just don't stop. So participation on that school-wide PBIS leadership team over time should be shared and open to interested staff, and therefore the membership should be rotated after that implementation has been gotten off the ground. So ideally, a 2 to 3 year term is recommended with that administrator being on that team throughout. But the team, the administrator, they're going to consider ways to allow when there are new members that want to join the team. How do we do that? If there is a member that leaves and goes to another school or just no longer wants to be a part of the team, how do we replace that member? So that is going to be part of the PBIS planning, is to determine how you are going to, how long will a team member serve, and what processes we will use when new people want to come on, and then what do we do when we lose a member. So when we're thinking about a team, every team wants to put in processes that are going to make them be more productive, that is going to make them be able to use their time more efficiently. So there are many effective team processes, but we're going to talk about a few in this video. So, and we'll talk about each of these individually. So one effective team process is making sure to create a team meeting schedule. We want to have these meetings on the calendar so that we know when they are and there will be no schedule conflicts. Another thing is to create a working agreement to make sure we understand what our responsibilities are. Creating a team meeting agenda that is given out prior to the meeting, which allows people to add time. Having decision-making rules, establishing those team roles, establishing communication roles, and then creating an action plan that we use to drive our meetings and plan our activities. So let's look a little bit deeper into each of those. So of course, a team meeting schedule is very important. So during that initial development and preparation and planning of PBIS, it's going to be important that that team meet more frequently because again, we're in the planning process. So at a minimum, those teams should meet once per month. That's the bare minimum, with additional meetings scheduled as needed to achieve the team's goal and planning needs. I will say that upon that beginning of that PBIS implementation, at that initial preparation, that team is probably going to have to meet more than monthly. So that schedule, that team meeting schedule, should be planned, put on a school calendar so that there are no other they're not scheduled for anything and they have that time and there's no conflicts that may arise. And so that team should have that schedule and try to schedule those meetings ahead of time so that they don't have any conflicts. So another effective team process is to create those working agreements. Those working agreements are those contracts that we as a team agree on how we are going to conduct ourselves within that meeting. It allows for teams to identify those behaviors that are going to show respect for your other teams. So some examples would be start on time, end on time, stay on topic, avoid unnecessary repetition, give your full attention. These are just behaviors that we're going to have posted in our meeting room so that we know how to respect one another's point of view, one another's opinions, one another's time, one another's expertise. Because again, a team is only effective as the relationship that they have built. So we want our team members to be able to feel respected and their time be respected, and we want them to be able to be productive. So these working agreements is something that they will come up with collectively. They will keep them posted, and then they're going to be reflecting on those. So again, as I said, the working agreements, that team wants to write them as a team. So they want to all agree with them. They want to be posted wherever that team is going to meet. The team wants to continuously review these working agreements before the start of meetings as pre-correct. We ask the teachers to do pre-corrects to ensure that we are, as an antecedent, to ensure that we're going to get the behavior the expected behavior. So the same thing goes for that team. We're going to review these working agreements prior to starting the meeting. There should be cues or reminders when there is someone that's not adhering to that working agreement. And then the meeting should conclude by reviewing what worked well, what didn't work, and what needs to be improved. So we're always going to start the meetings with the working agreements and end the meetings by reflecting on how well we met those standards in those expectations of that working agreement. So all meetings, of course, should have a meeting agenda. The team should know what is going to be discussed. So that meeting agenda is going to include topics for discussion. It's going to include a time allotment for each topic. It's going to include the person responsible for reporting or leading whatever that topic is. It's also going to include a space where people can add agenda items. Ideally, that agenda should be given out prior to the meeting date so that team members can add topics as necessary. So the next thing, or the next effective process that we're going to discuss, is creating those decision-making rules. So a team has to decide who's going to decide and how they will decide on certain topics or situations or things that they need to plan. So, of course, those two questions that they're going to ask themselves is who decides and how do we decide? So let's look at some decision-making processes. So, of course, one decision-making process is consensus, is that we make decisions by consensus. This means that every view or position is heard. All members are willing to support the decision. So some advantages of deciding by consensus is that generally it's going to ensure greater buy-in and therefore increase the likelihood of successful implementation. Another benefit or advantage is that it benefits from the input of all perspectives. So we're hearing everybody's voice and everybody is being heard. Once a decision has been reached, it can often be acted upon on more quickly than if a decision is something is unilaterally decided or handed down. So some disadvantages will be that making decisions by consensus, it can be time consuming to do and very difficult to do. It can be contentious if individuals or small minorities are allowed to block the agreement. Blocking, those are allowed to block that we can't come to a consensus, can result in dissatisfaction with that inflexible minority or that individual. So consensus means we have to get everybody's opinion, and there could be people that will be inflexible and prevent those decisions from being made. So, and that could cause people to become discouraged, and it could cause issues within that team. Another decision-making method is, of course, majority rule. So that just means that decisions are determined by a majority of votes. So the advantage of this is that it's familiar, it's time efficient. It's usually considered fair by some people. Now, the disadvantages is that it is regarded as competitive. It can be regarded as competitive rather than cooperative, meaning whoever has one view can go around and get people to vote based on what they believe. So they can go and solicit people to be on their side. It ignores the possibility of compromise, meaning that the differing opinions or views never have the opportunity to work together and to compromise. It can reduce the commitment of each individual to the decision and create less willingness to act upon the decision. So it just kind of turns people off and they don't want to participate because they may not feel like their voice is going to be heard. So participative or representative decision making, this means those making decisions seek and take into account input from the entire team or the staff. So some advantages of this type of decision making is that it's efficient in that it does not tie up the entire team or staff, but still provides the advantage of their input. Um, Another advantage from this type of decision making is that staff feel that they were heard, and it's generally accepted by many. Again, when we have a shared voice, more people are likely to buy in. It allows for administrative or other designated deciders to make a final decision using that feedback they have. A disadvantage is, again, sometimes it takes time to gather the input from that staff or that team. And there could be a potential of missing someone's voice or their decision or what they believe about whatever decision you're making. It's going to require good communication, and that team member or whoever's responsible for going back and soliciting those point of views is a good communicator and is able to clearly and explicitly explain the decision that needs to be made. So, of course, we all know about unilateral decision making. Unilateral means just what it says. One person or a group is empowered to make a decision without consulting others. Of course, we know because only one person is making a decision, this is the most efficient way to make a decision. This can be useful when a quick decision needs to be made. Now, we know the disadvantages is that unilateral decisions are open to abuse of authority. Someone could take advantage of it and make decisions that the rest of the team or the staff doesn't necessarily agree with. Of course, it's going to overlook some perspectives. It's not going to be representative of that team. If unilateral decisions are overused, it can be demoralizing by the team or the staff, and it's going to cause your implementation to fail because people are no longer going to be committed because they don't feel their voices are heard. So the team, whatever the team decides to use as their decision-making process, remember that there's no one way that's going to be used all of the time. There will be certain decisions that have to be made with consensus. There may be some decisions that may have to be made unilaterally. So the team has to decide which decisions will be made how. So after that team has been formed, each team, in order to be effective, another effective process is to assign team member roles. Everyone has a responsibility on that team. So some team roles could be a chairperson. And remember, these people that are these team members and these roles are going to have responsibilities that they need to do before the meeting and responsibilities that they need to do during the meeting, as well as responsibilities that they need to do after the meeting. So one role could be a chairperson. So before that team meeting, that chairperson is going to develop the agenda with input from the team. They're going to send that agenda out to the team members. During the meeting, that chairperson is going to facilitate the meeting. And after the meeting, that chairperson is going to follow up on assigned tasks and seek input from team members and etc. So another role could be a secretary. Again, that person is going to be providing meeting reminders to the team before the meeting. During the meeting, they're going to be keeping the minutes. And after that meeting, they're going to distribute those minutes. We can have a communication coordinator, an implementation or intervention coordinator, a timekeeper, a cheerleader. Everyone has a role in there, and everyone has a role of what they're going to be doing before, during, and after the meeting. Assigning roles is going to help that team be more productive, be more efficient, and get tasks and accomplish those goals in that action plan. So, as I said, it's very important that the teams communicate with their stakeholders. So, it's very important that tier one team creates processes that they're going to use to communicate with their staff, with their stakeholders, which are their families, their community members, the students, the other staff members in the building, the district personnel, etc. So that that plan should include methods for one, sharing ongoing information, how are we going to present data that we are collecting and showing how well the implementation is going, and how they're going to obtain feedback from stakeholders, which are, like I said, include staff, students, families, and community. How are we going to ensure that we are hearing the voice of our stakeholders? And we know providing voice to your stakeholders is a culturally responsive practice, and that has to be an intentional process that is planned out. So, as we know, with every initiative, that there are going to be some people that are resistant to that change. So, I like this quote from Jim Knight. It says, "Those involved in the change must go through a learning process in order to shift paradigms and appreciate the goals of the change, to make adaptations to new practices, to be allowed to adequately prepare to attempt to implement the change, and to be supported as change is implemented." So, part of getting that staff buy-in is one, that there needs to be systems put in place to support the adults and the changes that we're asking them to make. The team has to always also understand that that change takes time. And so there are going to be some people that are hesitant to change because one, they may be someone that change is triggering, but they also may be someone that's been around in the environment for a long time and have seen initiatives come and go. So they may be hesitant to adopt a new initiative because they don't believe it's going to work. So that tier one team is going to be responsible for marketing the benefits of that change and ensuring that those staff and anyone that has to implement has the skills necessary to implement what we're asking them to do. So some ways to establish stakeholder buy-in include teachers must believe that the changes will make a difference. They have to believe that what we're asking them to do is going to work. That PBIS team is going to have to provide multiple levels of support, multiple levels of coaching to support that change. Teachers and staff must see what is expected and believe it will work. So we have to show them examples of where this has been beneficial. We have to help them understand the research. We have to educate them about the research behind PBIS and the foundations to show that this is a proven practice. This is a proven framework that has research and it's evidence-based to show that it works. In order to get that buy-in, the stakeholders must be involved in that decision-making process. They must feel their voice is being heard and acknowledged in those decisions. And as always, the expertise of all staff must be consistently respected, recognized, and taken into account when we make those decisions. So the last thing, in order to get teacher buy-in, there are several things that leaders must do. The leaders must verify that the changes that they're asking them to make are research-based, they're supported by other practitioners, and can provide a significant positive impact. So they have to let the teachers understand that this is going to work, and there's evidence to show that this works. And of course, we know there is enough, and there is a lot of research to show that multi-tier systems of support work. That PBIS, which is an example of a multi-tier system of support, works. That proposed changes has to match the staff identified needs. So as we said at the beginning of the video, that team has to, one, identify the changes, where the school are, what are the current changes that need to be, what are the current organization's needs, and then they have to ensure that the staff agree with their findings, and that findings should be based off of data. And if that staff doesn't agree, then we need to get some of their feedback to identify those people, their perspectives, and include those perspectives. And then understanding that support will be the teachers and those being asked to do this implementation need to be reassured that support will be provided to learn, implement, and sustain the changes that we are asking them to make. Thank you for tuning into this video. Please don't forget to hit like or subscribe.